News and Politics show. As we usually do, kick off with Inside the Beltway Politics with Jennifer Lawless down at American University. Jennifer, thanks for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
Well, want to kick off sort of the big news today in Washington was these questions leaked to the press, maybe, if you will, Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into the president. Now, if these were the questions that he was floating to Trump's lawyers pertaining to Russia, what's the talk been down there that these questions are out there?
Well, two things. First, they indicate that Mueller is going to do everything he possibly can to make it very difficult for Donald Trump to refuse to answer these questions. By providing the questions ahead of time, he's already demonstrated that he's willing to concede quite a bit in terms of respecting the president and the office of the president. And so by floating them, he's made it more difficult for the president to say no. The other thing I would note is that these were not linked from Mueller's team,
okay,
right? So this was the White House trying to put these questions out, and it's a little bit unclear why they would do so. One reason would be to say, look, we're going to make it very clear that the investigation is not explicitly about collusion. None of the questions themselves use that word. That's a possibility. Another possibility is for the White House to put them out to make it very clear to all of Trump's supporters that, of course, he has to say no and that he's not willing to answer these questions because they're far too open-ended and he'll tie a rope around his neck.
And we've seen some reaction, though, today from Trump. Like, we got some mixed signals. It didn't sound like he believed maybe it was from his side.
Well, this wouldn't be the first time that the president is not necessarily on the same team as his own staff. It's also unclear that he understands why they would have an incentive to leak it. Now, if it's true that they're trying to shame him into refusing to speak to Mueller because the questions are bad, this might have been their attempt to send a signal to the president without him actually signing off on that leak.
And did you read through the questions? Were there any ones that maybe raised an eyebrow? You talk about the fact that there was nothing referencing collusion. Is that the biggest takeaway?
I mean, I think the big takeaway is that it is a very widespread set of questions, right? So we're not only talking about one particular meeting. They're talking about firing Mike Flynn. They're talking about the meeting at Trump Tower. They're talking about the Don Jr. letter. There are a wide variety of questions, Comey's firing. So all of the little incidents along the way that have raised red flags are part of that list, which suggests that the scope of the investigation is wide. The other thing that's kind of interesting here is that all of them require quite a bit of elaboration. So these are the top line questions, right? And there would be a lot of sub-questions. These are not quick yes-no questions. So it also highlights that the administration, if they're planning on only saying that they'll lend Trump to the special counsel for an hour or 2 hours, it's probably not going to get what they want because we're talking about at least an 8 or a 12-hour period required to shed light on the answers to these questions.
So we've known for some time now that Mueller was eyeing, again, having Trump in for this line of questioning. Again, these questions coming out today just spurred conversation certainly down there. Do we have a sense of time frame, Jennifer, now that, again, these questions are out, that this sit-down could potentially happen? Whose hands does this, who makes this a call at this juncture?
Well, I mean, the important thing to remember here is that the only thing that we know is that the New York Times had these questions, right? Somebody sent them to the New York Times. We don't know what Mueller's timeline is. We don't know exactly how the Trump administration will respond. If previous leaks from the investigation are any indicator, then probably soon, because once something is made public, it seems usually to be the case that Mueller and his team have already begun to take the steps to do whatever it is that leak talked about. So I wouldn't be surprised if we're talking about the next couple of weeks or months. The earlier that Donald Trump speaks to the special counsel's office, the better, if he's worried about how his statements could play at the midterm election point. So sooner is better than later if he's concerned that this could ultimately be a drag on Republicans running across the country.
So we're keeping an eye on the time frame of this line of questioning that, again, was released today from special counsel Robert Mueller. Let's talk a little bit about time frame and where things are with the correspondents' dinner and the reaction to it. Are we at the tail end of the news curve here?
I think we are. I mean, I never thought I would say this, but I think Chris Christie said it best. That's a sentence I didn't expect to come out of my mouth, but I think he said it best when he said that anybody that is surprised or upset about this really should just keep in mind that the same way that the Trump administration hasn't done a great job vetting, neither did the White House correspondents, because Michelle Wolf gave them exactly what you should have expected given the comedy that she performs. And so anybody that's upset or thinks it was too raunchy or too dirty or too below the belt has clearly never seen her perform before. It was completely unexpected to see this kind of criticism, given that what she put forward was completely expected.
And, because we saw some backlash. We saw it from, the press, not a huge surprise. I mean, they knew who it was going to be. Clearly, the correspondence organization as itself makes that call. But again, were you surprised at this type of reaction that the press was so harsh on it?
I mean, I think that the press was stuck a little bit between a rock and a hard place because the administration at least gave them a little bit this time by sending Sarah Sanders or Kellyanne Conway to the dinner, right? So although Donald Trump bashes the press on a daily basis and questions the values of the First Amendment, by having high-ranking administration officials at the dinner, it seemed like it was at least a little bit of a concession or a little bit of a move toward détente. And then when you have Wolf do what she did, it can sort of backfire. So I'm not that surprised that they were a little bit upset. But again, this is a situation where it's crazy to think that they didn't know what they were getting.
And clearly, when you have the speaker, when you have the comedian basically deliver at the correspondence dinner, I mean, what'd you think? Scale of 1 to 10. Was she funny or not?
I mean, I thought she was a little mean. I thought a lot of it was funny, but I think that the best stuff is funny and mean, and I think there was a big distinction. Like, her funny stuff was funny, and her mean stuff was kind of just mean. But I think the other reason that it's important to put this into perspective is typically after the comedian delivers remarks, the president gets up and is really the star of the evening and delivers biting remarks back. And that just didn't happen because Donald Trump refuses to participate. So, I think she might also be being held to a standard that's not entirely fair because typically there's somewhat of a rebuttal.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about chatter going on with what we've seen with North and South Korea. A little détente, as you just mentioned, if you will, chattering the President of the United States Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah. I mean, look, if this turns out to be the wave of the future, and if North and South Korea actually are going to walk across the border and hold hands on a regular basis, then people have gotten the Nobel Peace Prize for a lot less. Now, what I would say though is that I'm not sure that the Nobel Peace Prize should be awarded to somebody whose sort of uncertain behavior and instability that he brings to the global community is what might have inspired North and South Korea to get together and try to end this war. So it might be the case that this is in large part a result of Donald Trump, but not necessarily his negotiation skills. It could be a result of the fact that he doesn't always know exactly what he's doing, and that level of uncertainty creates incentives for other players to start making nice. So time will tell, but I would not be surprised if he winds up getting the Nobel Peace Prize.
So a lot of chatter going on there down inside the Beltway, but certainly wanted to bring you back up here to Rhode Island, a state you know so well, with what's transpired in the last week. A lot of conversation since then. It seems like it's almost even been a year. Matt Brown saying that he's going to enter the gubernatorial race as a Democrat, looking to primary Gina Raimondo, who already has a couple other contenders in the field. And then Link Chafee saying that he's looking at taking on Sheldon Whitehouse. Let's start with the governor's race.
Look, I think it's the only way that Matt Brown's got a shot to win, right? And I said several weeks ago or a month ago, whenever he announced that he was running as an independent, that there's just no room for that on the ticket. A really, really divisive, crowded Democratic primary could be a way for him to eke out 24 or 25% of the vote in a crowded field and then face a Republican challenger and ultimately win. I still think the odds are not in his favor, but it makes much more strategic sense than running as an independent.
And what did you think when you saw, if you did see these fundraising numbers from the governor for Q1 2018, $1.3 million?
She's not kidding around, right? She wants to make sure that she scares off any challengers that would otherwise be thinking about running and have not yet filed. And I think she also wants to make it very clear that from day one, she has enough money to get on TV and make sure that she makes her case to the residents of Rhode Island, and that at the end of the day, she also has enough money left to bash whatever challenger manages to, sort of make it closer to Election Day. So, I mean, those are very, very healthy numbers.
So both on the gubernatorial side and the senatorial, we're looking at two candidates running to the left of the established candidate, ostensibly on the Bernie Sanders wave, and what we had seen here in Rhode Island in 2016 with Bernie besting Hillary Clinton. Can Matt Brown count on that, or is that not really the deciding factor?
I'm not sure that it's the deciding factor. And keep in mind, too, that Gina Raimondo and Sheldon Whitehouse are not Hillary Clinton. So part of the Bernie Sanders appeal had to do with who his opponent was in the primary, and then ultimately how that opponent might fare in the general election. And so a lot of the baggage that Hillary Clinton had, a lot of the establishmentness that she carried with her, I don't think are necessarily liabilities for Whitehouse or Raimondo. Now, it's possible that voter turnout will be a little bit higher, or people that voted for the first time because Bernie Sanders motivated them to register and vote will now be part of the electorate. But, I don't think that there's a direct transfer.
And Link Chafee looking to take on Whitehouse. Let's look at that race.
I mean, the funniest part about that is if Lincoln Chafee would have run as a Democrat in 2006 against Sheldon Whitehouse, he would still be in the Senate, right? So, I mean, I don't think that there's much to be said here. It's also pretty hard to make the case that Whitehouse isn't a solid progressive leader. Now, sure, you can highlight a vote here or a vote there, but when you look at the Rhode Island delegation, he's certainly as far to the left as you can get.
So it's going to be an interesting political year here in 2018 in Rhode Island, and certainly across the country. We really appreciate being able to pick your brain. Anything else to keep an eye on in the coming week?
I mean, I think that what we're going to see a little bit more of this week is more discussion of the steel tariffs as well. Right now, Canada, Mexico, and the EU are all disgusted with Donald Trump. So the day that South Korea and North Korea are like, oh, maybe he has something to offer us, every Western ally is turned off. So this is just one of these things where name the issue and you're going to get a different group of people that are either supportive or opposed. And that's not a great position to be in if you're trying to elect a lot of Republicans or keep their seats in November.
And then, we looked and saw North and South Korea, Iran. Any thoughts for the future, keeping an eye on that there with the revelations this week?
Well, I mean, if anything so I saw Netanyahu on the news this morning basically parroting the same lines as Donald Trump, like verbatim. And so, literally, like they put up the screens next to each other. And so,
do you think they had the same talking points? Do you think they exchanged emails?
I think they might have sent a text. I don't know. Twitter. It was all via Twitter. And so I think that I think that Donald Trump is going to continue, especially after the meetings that he had with France and Germany last week, to explain why the Iran deal is bad and prepare everybody for the U.S. to in no way be willing to negotiate.
Well, keeping an eye on things, foreign relations nationally and also here in Rhode Island, Jennifer Lawless, we always appreciate being able to pick your brain. We look forward to talking with you next week.
See you next week.
Okay, thanks. Jennifer Lawless down at American University, heading to UVA, former congressional candidate here in Rhode Island. Always like to get the Inside the Beltway take with her on Tuesdays. Don't go anywhere. We're going to get a little more local here at GoLocal. We'll be right back.